Let's give our panel and our moderator a round of applause, and we'll turn the time over to Ben.
Can you guys hear me? Thanks, Mike. All right, well, I'm Megan Fisher. I'm a senior product designer at Instructure, and super excited about this topic. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this awesome panel. So I was hoping that each of you could take a turn and do a short introduction, like a 30-second introduction, and we'll get started.
Okay, well, thank you. My name is Sneed, and this is the dreaded elevator pitch. Who am I? Yeah, so my latest endeavor was I was working with Overstock, heading up the UX team there. Amazing team, really great people working there. If anybody ever comes and interviews with you, you should totally hire them. And before that, I worked down here in Provo at ObservePoint in product. Product is my background. I've worked almost 15 years in product management roles, from a junior product manager. I've done a lot of user research. Yeah, and now currently I'm consulting companies, and I'm here and I'm happy to talk with all of you tonight, and I'm excited for your questions, and I'm super happy to be on such a great panel here.
Thank you, Seth. Emmy?
I'm Emmy. I've been doing UX design, I think we're going on 19 years. It's been a while. I just took on a role as a senior product manager at Lendio. Had an opportunity to run my own product line and build out a design and product team. So I just started, second day today. I've been doing, as a UX director, building out teams, managing cross-functional teams for marketing design and product design, building out large teams that are across the world, manage teams across the United States and into the Middle East and India. So excited to be here and answer questions on growing your UX teams.
I'm Ben. I'm currently the VP of User Experience and Design at a company called Clarivine down in Provo, and before that I was Director of UX at Vivint Solar. And basically, building and advocating UX teams and UX processes is just kind of an awesome hobby. I don't want to call it a hobby, but it's what I do for profession, but it's a thing that brings me a bunch of joy to be able to do that. And I'm excited to talk amongst these guys and answer all these questions you have about that.
Hi everyone, I'm John Grover. I am a senior product manager at WeWork. Before that, I've been there for 4 months. Before that, I was at Grow.com, which is in this building, running the product UX team there. And then before that, I had 13 years at InMoment, running the product and UX team there and building the UX team there. So I also had a wonderful opportunity with TJ Nelson in the back to do a little kind of side project to see if we could build upon the Dev Mountain UX bootcamp, and so we created a little bootcamp called Product Bound that we ran for a couple of years, and so I've always loved teaching UX and being involved in UX, even though I actually come from a product manager background.
Awesome, thanks guys. So I thought maybe a good way to kick this off is if you guys could talk a little bit about what UX maturity means to you. And then we can start taking some questions from the audience.
You gonna make me start? I think it means to me the ability of an organization to make decisions on how they involve the design process in their product organization, how they're involving UX designers, and also how they're deciding how they're taking customer empathy and building it into their products. To me, that's what UX maturity means.
Maybe adding to that, I think this is a great definition. I'm about defining what UX actually means, and does your company have a common understanding of what they mean when they talk about UX, right? When you go into your company, when you work, and you ask them, what do you think a UX designer does, or do we do UX? And the answers are, oh, those are the ones with the pixels. Oh, and oh yeah, we actually need to overhaul our website. I think we don't like the colors anymore. Then probably on a maturity scale, you're a little more in the beginning. When then you start talking about, well, is it actually product or is it UX we're talking about? We actually had a good discussion earlier about this, and you talk about, do we understand our users? Do we ask our users? Do we know who our user is? Do we know who the target user is? And do we know what their problems are? Then on a maturity scale, you're probably farther ahead. And this is where you want to be. And it's not always easy. And the challenging thing at work is, like, we're not in a perfect world, right? But that's what makes our jobs fun, and that's what, you know, drives me every day when I go to work or when I go and consult companies. And I feel like there might be something more here. I don't know. Do you feel like you want to add?
So in a lot of the companies that I've been in, UX was either brand new or there was a process already in place, but it was kind of broken. And so for me, I feel like design maturity is entering in at that beginning space where people, like what you were saying, it's like, so you do graphic design, right? And then it's like, okay, I'll live with that for a moment, but then it's continually pushing the boundary so that instead of being the, you know, pixel pusher, if you will, to actually solving problems and creating more meaningful designs at the same time. It's that entire process from entry level all the way up to fully integrated into the company, solving problems and having that seat at that table.
I'll just add the last piece. I define UX maturity. If you look at a mature UX organization, they look at their UX process and their UX designers as a competitive advantage, and they give the time and resources necessary to perform at a high level.
Great, thank you guys. So does anybody have any questions? Does anyone want to kick this off? Sure.
Ben, you just said something interesting, which was having a seat at the table. In my first couple of years as a product designer, I found myself saying that a lot. When I was the only designer, I was always like, why don't I have a seat at the table? Then we'd hire more designers, and then it was, why don't we have a seat at the table? And I noticed in my last few years, I'm less concerned about having a seat at the table. I'm more concerned about enabling others to feel like they have a seat at the table. Why does this come up so often? What do you think the root cause of that is, and how do you experience that?
So the question is, this phrase, having a seat at the table, kind of why does this come up and why is this important? Is that?
Yeah, what's your experience with it?
What's your experience with it?
Okay. So, you know, unless you're a real brand new startup that's already forward thinking, you are usually working for a company that has a top-down model, and they have to honor that kind of hierarchy of, oh, you know, your title actually means basically everything. And so when I say the seat at the table, I'm saying you're part of the decision. You're part of the core group that is making a decision for the business, for the product, for whatever. And depending on the company, you usually have to fight tooth and nail basically to get UX inside of that, because like what you were saying, once the UX maturity is finally there, they actually find value inside of that, and that's where you're really validated within that table. Now we can say it's figuratively, of like, oh, you know, you have, you know, the figurative table sitting out there and we're all around it. You know, as UX and as I lead my UX team, I try not to leave anybody outside of that. I want to bring in my entire team. I want to bring in whoever else that I can that I feel like has valuable input and will actually create meaningful conversation, instead of just saying, well, I'm here, I'm the boss, I'm going to make that final call. And it's up to us to be able to basically have that input so that it doesn't get in that direction, so you can help persuade the product to where you know that it needs to go, because you have the ears closest to the ground, you are working with customers, you are doing that research, and the decision makers, the boss guys, they're basically just listening to the chatter that's happening directly around them. And so it's extremely important for us to make sure that we're pushing as hard as we can to get there. And you're right. You want to include you want to include everybody at that table, your team, everybody, because everybody brings so much value to that. And it's up to you to advocate as much as you can for that.
There was a recent survey done by Envision on their Design Co. site, and they kind of looked at the design process going in organizations, and they found that like the top performing companies, only 5% of them had a representation at like a C level for design, and you could correlate their revenues and success of product because they had elevated design to be forefront in the business. Like that drove business decisions. And then you had 41% of the companies that just didn't have any representation or save design to be kind of the lipstick on the pig type thing. Like you go paint the product after it's already built. So design was saved last. But the performance increased in the company when they could put design at the forefront.
So you said 5%. So let me ask a question. How many of the companies that you work at, do you feel have a seat at the table? A UX has a seat at the table. Okay, so we're probably 5% or less. So let me, I think, address the 95%, because I don't want everyone to give up hope that the only way to increase your UX maturity is to have someone at the seat at the table. I think that's a surefire way of doing it. I'm a big advocate of intrapreneurs, and I define intrapreneur as somebody that is willing to go outside of the box that they have been tasked with and to go above their pay grade. Your title might be UX designer, it might be product manager, it might be junior UX researcher, but I think each one of us have the ability to go into our organizations and actually use the UX process that we talk about all the time, and kind of meta, so this is kind of meta, use it internally. UX is your product. Your internal stakeholders are your customers. Have you empathized with them? What are their problems that they have? Have you helped define those problems for them? Have you helped ideate and figure out how UX can work with that? Working with other stakeholders that are not UX, educated in UX, and walking through the UX process, getting some good wins, small wins at first, can help you improve your UX maturity. And hopefully one day you can be that person that sits at the table. Or you can help influence getting somebody at that table. But I just wanted to speak to the 95%, because a lot of organizations I've worked in haven't had that. And so there are other ways to get UX maturity.
Any other questions?
What are some practical things that you guys have done to work your way all the way back to being part of the process where you get to all of that skill communication?
I'm glad you asked.
So the question is, what are some of the ways?
Some practical things, things that you've done.
What are some of the practical things that you've done?
This is a great question, because I was just gonna, I was like, is there a burning question? Because I want to add something to what you just said, because that's like the ideal state, right? This is the dream. We're the entrepreneurs, and we're going out there, and people are actually going to listen to us until you talk to that one product manager or that one boss or that one VP who just knows better. And he's going to drop, or she's going to drop something on the whiteboard, and that's actually the solution for the customer, right? And so my most recent experience, and I'm incredibly grateful for having gone through that, and you can use this, tell this story, use stories, because that's how managers take, right? The chatter, the stories is what managers understand, what leaders understand. One of the stories I can give you today is, I was lucky and I got a seat at the table for UX, and we always joked about like now UX has a voice, right? And I have a loud voice if you haven't noticed. And so we got to speak up and change the process a little bit. We started earlier, and we would actually do the classical what you learn in school and what you do so well, which is empathize with the users and iterate, try something, user test it, try it again, and then build it, and save some of those really highly paid development resources and not just throw something out there and see if the spaghetti sticks. And we had a project, and within 6 months we actually drove our NPS up considerably, especially on that lever of design. It was like you could see that in the numbers. And this is something, when people, it's hard to go and convince a manager if you don't have numbers. So either you have a number from something that you've done in the past, or you can tell a story that you've either pulled off the internet or listened to on a QA panel. So yes, changing your process and including UX earlier and giving them, even if you don't give them a seat at the table, if you allow user experience design, if you allow user insights, if you allow user research, you can bring your NPS scores up. And if you measure your average value that you have for a customer per NPS score, you can actually prove out that those customers most likely are more valuable. This is what it was in our data. So if you can get your hands on data, if you can befriend analysts and get data, that will help you drive that entrepreneurial spirit. And that's something you can do in your day-to-day work. You probably have access to data, or you have access to tools where you can do research. And then make sure you track. And eventually, in the end, we're always looking for dollars, right? So can you translate that into a profit? Can you translate that into a conversion that translates into revenue or sales? Or the less good number, but also money number, is less operational costs, right? Less mistakes you make after you developed it, because everything that's in the market is like 10 to 100 times more expensive to change than everything you change before you bring it out in the market.
Great. Want to add to that?
I was just thinking that as we talk like the seat at the table and making an impact, sometimes your seat is just on that product team, and that's the first place you should focus on making impact. I love when I have like an executive come to me and say, okay, how can we have your team make greater impact? Because everything they touch turns to gold. And that's what I found, is that when I can get my UX designers to focus on their own product teams, their own product, gain that trust of the product manager, the developers, their product starts to grow and gain visibility within the company. And pretty soon the rest of the company is trying to pay attention, like, what's going on with this team? And it's usually that design member that is facilitating the conversations and the progress of the team, just simply by good UX practices. And I love that point when I start getting more headcount and I can hire more people, because the company wants that influence. Not that we need a seat at the executive table, but we need a seat at the product, on the product teams.
Sorry, my voice is not great. I really liked what you said about telling a story. I think that really, really helps. I've lately tried to do more putting together a presentation anytime I'm working on a feature and telling that full story, because we know it in our mind, but a lot of times the other people on the team that the other teams that we're working with don't know the story. And if you can help them have that empathy and see the full picture, it's a lot more powerful. So I really like that point. Anything else? Yep.
How do you tell the story from the customer's perspective, so that you can show the pain points and how a better product would be more pleasing to the customer?
So how do you tell the story from the customer's perspective and
to the to the decision makers within the company?
To the decision makers in the company?
Just simply, I found that recording your session and then clipping it, there's nothing more valuable than actually seeing and hearing the customer for themselves. I mean, even if you take a quote and write it up on a slide, it's not as impactful as hearing their voice and seeing their reaction. So if you can record a session and put that into your presentation, it can be very compelling. I've seen full presentations kind of stop, and the whole executive team just focuses on that comment that the customer has.
Yeah, I think that having that type of impact like that, we have created a CAB, Customer Advisory Board, and what that does is basically it kind of does twofold, right? So I'm going out and reaching out to a customer, and I'm getting that feedback. They're voluntarily saying, yes, I want to be part of your product, right? But at the same time, I'm getting this wealth of knowledge on this feedback from some of our top tier clients or our top tier customers that when I come back to my boss or the CEO or whatever, and I can lay that down at the desk and say, this is where we hit the mark here, and we totally missed the mark way over here, right? And that, just having just those numbers and saying, because then his brain instantly goes to how many dollars he wasted on that development or pushing that product or that marketing. And at that point, then he's like, well, what should we have done different, right? It's like, I got an idea, right? And so at that point, you're able to go back and start diving deeper with that customer feedback and getting more people involved. And then at the same time, the customer is feeling heard, they're feeling validated, and when you invite them to a beta program is, hey, thanks for being a part of this cab, right? And then they're like, wow, you've actually listened to what we were trying to do. And then they go out and they tell their friends. And so it's this massive cycle. So I think that getting either video or getting other areas that you can actually have proof and say, this isn't my opinion, this is coming from our customers. And I don't know who you deal with or whatever, but in my experience, the higher up the customer, the value of that customer is to our company, the easier it is to get decisions made and decisions made faster according to the needs of the customer on that area.
I think if you can tie it into a couple different presentation points. So one, you want to hit analytics. So for someone that's very number driven, if they can correlate the customer comments back to maybe trends you're seeing in customer feedback or number of complaints coming in or revenue driven by your competitors, if you can tie it back to a number, then it starts to make a lot of sense to that number driven, maybe your CFO or someone else who's kind of putting the brakes on UX. Then if you can tie in the story part, where you can create like a customer journey map. So you've taken all this feedback and you created a map of how the product or the process works. That helps for the person that clues into stories. Then visually, if you can show like that video, people can start to see like, oh, I understand how our customer landscape, or you're creating personas, and so that also creates stories and also a visual. They can capture the concept. And then the last area is just social, and that's where they can see their peers, or they can actually talk to these individuals and get that story. So I think if you address all four of those areas, your case or your presentation becomes much stronger. And there's UX tools to address each one of those. So I talked about like a journey map, there's affinity diagrams, there's hierarchy or prioritization exercises you can do when you come to build a roadmap. There's a lot of tools you can do to address the kind of different personalities and how people come to consensus.
Amen. That's awesome.
Who else has a question? Sure.
Where I work, it's a lot more, we have a roadmap, a good structured roadmap, but we deal with recency bias in a big way where it's like, oh, now we want you to work on this. Even though we've worked on this for a while, I feel like we have a problem with just staying on track and keeping, they hear something from a client and it's like, boom, we gotta change what we're doing here. So do you guys have that experience, or how you dealt with that?
So the question is, even though you have a product roadmap, there's issues with recency bias or things kind of throwing it off track, and how do you deal with that?
We're all over the place. We have so many things that we're working on that sometimes it's like, oh, 3 months later, oh yeah, I remember we worked on that a while ago.
So you're just kind of all over the place. Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask like who prioritizes your roadmap?
So it's the chief product officer who does that. But then the CEO will say, oh, I heard a complaint from a client, so now I'm going to change that.
Who gives that CEO permission to change the roadmap?
Himself. In a lot of ways, yeah.
So sometimes you can help your chief product officer by just referring back to him and like make him the authority. So if you have one point of authority on making that decision and everyone on the team starts to support that person, then you don't have your little seagulls come in and poop on the project. But really, like if there's one decision maker that can prioritize things, it's crucial to a project to keep it focused. But if the company starts, or the product team starts to let other people come in and decide, or call them little red lines, or shoulder tapping, if you allow that to happen, you'll never get anything done. So you just have to kind of force that decision maker to make those decisions and not let other people come in and do that.
What about for somebody who doesn't maybe have access, like direct access to that person? What can someone at maybe a junior and mid-level do to make a difference there?
Someone's always telling you what to do, so. Right? So you can pick that person.
I'm gonna try it because I agree with you. And again, this is the ideal world. And sometimes you have the power to force that. And this goes a little bit more into product management, but I think it also applies to UX design. Like one of our qualities is we have to learn to say no, and we have to stick to our no's. And that's also the hardest part in the job. And I see you nodding. Because the next shiny thing is always there, and especially if the CEO is sales-driven, especially if there's numbers, especially if somebody feels like, oh, we're going to lose a customer, then very quickly all the roadmaps and everything we talked about is going to be forgotten, and the pulse is just through the roof, especially in smaller companies. I think sometimes you have to roll with it because you don't want to lose your job. But what you can do is, in the retrospective, ask, how well did we fare with this? How good are we in delivering on time? How well are we doing in the success with our other customers? Like, are the other 95 going to be okay if this feature falls away? And maybe ask the question, what is this one customer costing us? Like, and talk to somebody in finance about this, because sometimes customers are more expensive to keep than to lose. And sometimes because, you know, the energy is high in the spur of the moment, we're looking emotionally at that situation, but when time is gone, we can look a little bit more rational at the situation. So it's hard to change it in the moment, and it's hard to say the no always in the moment. But try to instill a process or a culture of retrospective and looking back and asking those questions and being entrepreneurial, going out of your role, and not only ask the questions, do we empathize with our customers, but ask the question, how valuable are the customers? Are we serving the 20% customers that making us 80% of the revenue, or are we serving those customers that are actually not making us revenue and profit? And that may be an opportunity, but I'm not gonna lie, there's always gonna be the new shiny thing.
One thing I would say is what are your product metrics, and are they solid, and are you really using those to guide your roadmap? Because in organizations I've worked on where the new shiny object wins is usually because the metric is release software, right? And so if that's your lowest criteria and that's kind of the bare minimum, well, it doesn't matter what you release. Releasing anything works. And so, whereas if you have a different product metric like adoption, and you have been able to build your roadmap saying, through user research, we've identified that these are the things that are going to improve adoption, now there's a higher bar of getting something on the roadmap. If a new feature comes in, you have to ask, is that going to get us more adoption than the things that are already on the roadmap? So I'd say product metrics, and the other thing is saying no is really important. The easiest way to say no is having a bigger and better yes. And so your roadmap, I guess if things are winning that are new and shiny, you have to question, are you doing a good job of selling your current roadmap? And is your roadmap backed up in a way with research and has a compelling story? So that when someone comes in and says, hey, I want this, new shiny objects, and you say, okay, you can have that, but you have to give up this, that they have to kind of have that conversation and that internal battle. I've been able to win a lot of war battles when someone comes in and says, you know, customer X is one of our biggest customers, they need this. And I say, yeah, but I've got 20 customers, here's their ARR, that need this. So would you like to go talk to those 20 customers and tell them no? Because I've actually already communicated yes to them. So those are kind of the conversations you have to have. They're hard conversations, they're not easy, but those are two things I've found.
Next question. Sure.
I've been told by many design leaders that in order to be more effective within an organization, you have to foster better relationships so you can have more influence. My question is, relationship versus performance, what do you think? How does that play into the equation of how you're able to mature and have more influence?
So the question is, fostering relationships is important, and how do you choose performance versus relationships? Is that
Yeah,
right?
I think they're both relevant. So
Both relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you prioritize, I think?
I think Ben needs to answer.
I think you're right. You know, both are extremely important. You know, I think that when we think about this for 1 second, okay? Sorry.
While you're thinking,
Yeah.
I'm actually curious. Let's do a poll while you're thinking. Who thinks that performance is the factor that should drive more? Who thinks it's relationships? Okay, so if you have to choose between I'm trying to spend my time in building relationships or I'm trying to spend my time showing performance of UX, which one do you think is the more important one? Is it performance by show of hands? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Or is it fostering relationships, building relationships internally?
Can I say that? I think performance, if you're performing well, your relationships are thriving as well. The people that work around you look good because of you, and you're able to build trust. So I think it's kind of hard to separate them.
That's an amazing answer. Do you want to?
So she was just saying that if your performance is excellent, then that's essentially building those good relationships.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that comment. You know, so next question. No, but really, in my personal opinion, okay, take it for what it's worth. I feel like if I have a great relationship, my performance is excelling. If I have a great performance and I'm, you know, delivering and I'm exceeding expectations, then my relationships are growing, right? And at least in the companies I've worked for, I've been able to reach higher and higher up, basically the food chain, because of my performance, right? I've been able to create relationships based off of that and being able to talk to people based off of that because they then trust, oh, he's been able to do this. Maybe it goes back to the seat of the table, right? So it's like they're able to see what you're able to produce, to give, and your accomplishments, basically. And at that point, you know, the relationships change. It's like, instead of saying, you know, hey, we need that button, or we need to do this, or we need whatever over here, it's like, well, I don't know, let's ask Ben, right? And then at that point, you know, that relationship now has a mutual respect, and I'm able to take UX to that next level in the UX maturity model, because I've built a foundation of performance. At the same time, I'm not being a jerk. I'm not being like, I'm a designer, dude. I know exactly what I'm doing, right? But you're building, you're talking, and you're treating each other with respect, right? And that is what helps grow. So again, I'm gonna reiterate that. I don't feel like you can have one without the other. They're directly relatable.
Next question.
Talked about process a little bit, but it touched on some aspects of sort of mature process. But to specifically talk about it, what processes, UX processes, show that you've reached maturity, and which ones have been in the best companies you've worked for, and then which ones show still quite junior.
So the question is, which UX process really shows UX maturity, and then which process shows kind of a lack of maturity?
We talked about some that I've written down that I think are germane, specifically.
This is a hard question to answer because part of process is generic, but part of process is also part of culture and very strongly related to the context of the company, how big the company is, which play field you're in, who your customers are you B2B, B2C. I think one thing that came to my mind, boiling it down to the essence, is if you see designers and research involved in a project early on, then you're most likely in a very mature state. And I think that's like the very, very essence that I can boil it down to without being more specific in like, okay, what kind of like standard process do we apply in a certain company? I don't know if you want to add to that.
Another point you brought up that I liked was the retrospective.
Mm-hmm.
A mature company looks back, how did we do, what went right, and learns from the last spring.
It's, as you're saying this, I like to compare companies to organisms, just like human beings, right? When you look at a mature human being versus a very immature human being, right? A mature human being will look at their mistakes and learn from their failures. Like, even a kid, like when they're falling, they're getting back up and they're trying to learn to walk, right? And so I think this is an important point, having retrospectives or allowing for failure, right? Like we had this thing at one company where we celebrated failures. Now, not stupid mistakes. Where you take a risk, you take the plunge and it just failed. And it can be okay, right? But you learn from it. Why won't we do it again this way? So that's an important one. And you can only do that if you allow for retrospectives and if you allow for trust, right? And then that goes back to relationships. If you have the culture that you can be open and vulnerable in that context, then you can learn. If it's a very cutthroat culture, and those companies thrive too, right? They can be successful too. They're making money too, and it's just a different culture, and that's why now we get into the specifics. Like some things work for a company that don't work for another company because it very much so depends on the culture and the individuals and who the leader is and what their style is. And I wouldn't want to judge one over the other. It's just a different style. I'm going to stop talking.
My last company, I probably built out the best design team I've ever had. And part of that was because I let them help build the team. And so we would discuss what kind of meetings we needed to hold for their benefit. We actually traveled to a couple of companies, other design teams, and interviewed them. So we'd sit down for an hour with them and just ask, okay, what processes do you have? What meetings do you do within your teams? How do you do style guides? How do you run branding with your marketing teams? It was fantastic. So we came back as a team and decided that we wanted to have several meetings. We wanted to have one where it was an hour and a half of just critique. And there were certain rules around the critique. Everyone had to present, and they had a time limit on what they could present, and they had to ask very specifically what feedback they wanted. And you couldn't provide feedback unless it was based on that criteria. We decided we wanted to have product strategy or UX strategy meetings as well. So it wasn't critiquing, but it was figuring out, okay, we're working on different parts of the product, and we have some overlap, and we have customers we need to address, or needs we need to address. So we'd have strategy meetings. We would do those. We decided to come in earlier in the morning so it would be more quiet within the company. And we would change. We'd change about every 3 months. Say, hey, okay, this meeting's getting a little redundant. We're going to remove this meeting and do something else. We tried something called design huddles, where you'd meet for 30 minutes with different people. Maybe a marketing designer and a product designer would meet together and just go over, just individually, the two of them together, what they were working on. And that helped a little bit of cross collaboration, and we would switch up meetings. We design systems. We'd talk about, like, do we need design ops right now, or can we, like, spread that out around the team? Or do we actually need to make a design ops and a dev ops work together? I made it very democratic so that the team was deciding what we needed. And I think the design team just became very strong because of that. Because I didn't make all the decisions for them, and I helped build their own leadership and management skills as well.
Okay, I just want to build on that because I love what you said when you actually went out and had your UX team talk to other companies about what they're doing. Just to kind of give you, I have 3 companies in the Valley that I think are doing a really good job, and it's kind of they've created their own processes. One that you're familiar with, Pluralsight's Directed Discovery. It's great. Canopy, they have a theory-driven design process they've created, and Grow, which is in this building, has a process they call POV. Now they've all named them, and but they've actually owned them, and they've actually, if you look at them and you break them apart, there's pieces that you could find out on the internet. But that's one thing I think is such a critical thing that I would recommend everyone to do. Go online, find somebody from one of these organizations, go out to lunch with them, and talk to them about their process. I remember going out with Lucid, one of the UX designers at Lucid, and they talked about, they have a thing called Bill of Goods, and it was to help transition the UX design to the development team. And so they write up this Bill of Goods and they hand it off. I stole it. I love it. And I think that's what we need to do more in the Valley, because there are incredible ideas throughout the Valley, but they kind of get isolated in the kind of the orgs, and it's not until somebody actually leaves one of those organizations and goes into another organization that we start perpetuating some of these great ideas. So I love that.
So I just kind of want to add on to that, though, and just taking a little bit of different approach. So, you can't just take what's working at Grow. You can't take what's working at Pluralsight or what are these other companies. You use that as like a foundation. Like, oh, I like that idea, right? But you need to take the responsibility of listening to your own company and saying, what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to solve as a company unit, not only for customers, but what are we trying to solve for inside? And then having that knowledge and bringing that knowledge to the table so that you can then form a new process. I always think it's funny when people are like, when people say, oh, it's this, what UX process do you do? I don't know, I made it up, right? And it's because it's true. You make up a lot of it because you're tailoring it to fit the company. It's like, if you have a kid, I'm not gonna raise this kid the same as this kid. He has his own emotions, his own uniqueness to him, right? And same with a company. So when you're talking about maturity inside of a company, you really have to pay attention to that, to the nuts and bolts and the uniqueness of your company, and then looking outside and saying, man, I loved what they did there. Would that fit here? Sure, it could. Maybe I have to tailor it a little bit more and make it a little bit mine, but that was an awesome thing, and I love that. I think that there needs to be more sharing amongst us instead of being like, oh, I'm gonna keep my secrets to myself, But if we're out there and we're sharing what we're doing and the processes that are working for our company and the successes that we're having inside of that, I think will help the UX community as a whole really start gaining that true momentum that we're trying to really achieve.
Sorry, I love what you said. Thank you for that caveat, because that's true. I don't want to take any verbatim process. You can't take any of those processes and just implement them. They'll fail. Taking it down to an individual level, I always ask people in an interview, like a UX interview, tell me about your process. And they'll walk me through an IDEO process or a double diamond process. And then I'll actually always challenge them and say, well, how long does that usually take? And they'll say maybe 3 weeks. And I say, if you had to do it in a week, what would you cut? How would you cut it? What's important, what's not? And you can really tell the maturity of a UX designer that understands why they're doing what they're doing, and the value of each one of the artifacts and exercises. And they can say, you know what, in this scenario, for this project, I'm not gonna do my A to Z process. I might just do a few of them. And so I think that's an important thing individually that you have to understand. It goes also back to talking about UX maturity. When you don't have a very mature UX culture, you're not going to get the time and resources that you would like to do. Maybe a Google design sprint full week, right? You're not going to get the executives or stakeholders to spend a week with you. Sorry. So figure out how to do it and get some smaller wins. figure out what pieces of your process are the most critical to reduce risk and make sure you're successful, and implement those. And then when you get those ones, you can start adding to that. So
We had some questions over here, I think. Sure.
Yeah, could you talk about some like specific skills or attributes that that you like to grow in your own teams to have more junior people become more mature?
So what are the specific skills and attributes that you try to help more junior people on the team grow, right?
I've set up a couple apprentice programs at different companies I've worked at because I think that's kind of fun to have someone come in fairly new and watch them succeed, just kind of blow everyone away with their success. But the trick is like giving them a little bit of responsibility in the beginning and then growing it as they succeed. And if they fail, like give them a soft cushion, but make their failures a little bit harder every time. Because eventually they'll get to the point where they can pick themselves up and learn from that failure. But in the beginning, it's gonna shake them. So skills I see that they need to learn, it's being confident in their own design abilities and realizing like there is no right design. It's going forward and being confident in what they're doing. And then the next stage is being able to present that with confidence and getting buy-in from other people. And so in the beginning, I'll let them design and I'll present because they're not confident in that presentation yet. And then the next project, they need to present their skills. So I've shown them how to do it, and then they do it next. And so I build that. I'll do an example, and then let them do it next. And then they build to a point where they're running entire development team. They've got sprints running, user stories going, prototypes running, user testing. I build those skills so they're very self-sufficient by the time the apprenticeship is done. I love doing that because they usually leave me for a bigger, better job. Or I hire them fast enough that I get to keep them within the company.
Next question? Sure.
How do you take something that the product team would see as a win? They've added this new feature, this new button, this new product, where it's a win for them, but for the overall user experience, they might be a step back. So how do you get them to slow down and take that broader, and anticipate those questions that are going to come from this thing that they're so excited about that they just released and are working on developing?
A user test.
So the question was, how do you, when a feature is released and it's a big one for product, but maybe not UX as a whole, how do you take a kind of a step back and what was the last part of it?
Like, how do you help anticipate the questions that are going to come from that?
How do you anticipate the questions that are going to come from that?
Oh, I would set up some user tests pretty quickly and make sure the people that are really bought into that's their solution, make sure they see people using that solution.
Yeah, I say celebrate their win, man. Because I don't think I have all the answers, right? Now, if it means a step back, it's almost like I'm gonna take a look into what did I do wrong? Like what made it so that UX didn't have that foothold or that grasp, inside of that arena, like when that was happening, or we left out of a meeting. Like you really gotta look at the situation as a whole. And were you not loud enough? Were you not advocating enough? Were you, maybe were you too slow on a design or something? And they're like, we just have to pop this out. Like, and maybe they got lucky, right? I don't know. But the idea is to be able to be big enough to own that and use that as a learning for you and say, okay, what can we do better for next time in this situation? Or on the flip, do what Annie said and say, well, let's just go out and test it. Maybe it works, but if it didn't work, okay, I'm not gonna rub it in your face that it didn't work. I'm gonna come to you with a new solution and saying, hey, we kind of missed the mark here, but this allowed me to do a little bit more testing on that. Here's a new proposed solution for it. Hopefully we can run with it. sometimes you can't. But the point is that take that, own it, figure out where something happened, what went wrong, or whatever the case might be, right? Move forward.
Next question. Sure.
What are some ways besides like going to lunch with other designers to gauge UX maturity when you're looking to new companies?
So what are some ways other than going out to lunches with people in the community to gauge your UX maturity?
To gauge a company's UX maturity.
Oh, to gauge a company's UX
if you're
maturity.
Looking to move companies.
Oh, if you're looking for like a new job at a company.
So during the interview process,
Yeah.
what kind of questions might you ask to
Yeah.
gauge it? Oh, no, I was just clarifying. Oh, I don't know.
You know, you can just turn around what he does and ask, what is your design process? And what do you do if you have to cut it short? And how do you cut it short? I think you can, this is actually a really good question, and you can just turn it around. And I think it's totally fair to interview the company just as much as they are interviewing you. Like, this is a mutual relationship that you're entering into when you work somewhere. It's not like you're going there and you're like asking for a job and thank you so much that I get it. It's like you have something to bring to the table and you bring some knowledge in there, and so you're allowed to gauge who they are and what their culture is. So try to use your UX and empathy skills and use your research skills to ask those questions and figure out, okay, if I want to know what kind of culture they have here, what is a question I can ask? Like, how do you deal with failures? Tell me about the most recent project that failed and what did you do? Tell me about your most recent win and how did you celebrate it? Tell me about how do you do critical feedback, or how do you give feedback here, right? And all those, like, you can find questions that are acceptable that you can ask and kind of like poke into and see, okay, how do you deal with these situations? And is that something that I feel I can add value to that? Because either there's something not there yet, or is there something where I can learn? Whenever I interview for a company, these are the two only questions I want to know. Is there something I can bring to the table that they don't have that's of value for them? And is there something I don't have that I can learn, and if I go out of here, has made me grow? So, hope that helps. I don't know other ideas.
So I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions.
So what kind of things do you do to keep like your design thinking fresh amongst yourself, your direct UX team, and then even diving into your developers, product managers, and stuff like that? Like sometimes you're working in a product long enough, you start to think inside of a box and like, oh, we always use this component, this pattern for this, or whatever. Like, how do you freshen things up, blow those walls down, and rethink things from the ground up?
So the question is, how do you keep your design thinking fresh kind of among the whole product team so you don't get kind of stuck in the box of the product you've been working on?
I can't say I do this very often, but it's something that I've seen it happen. I know, like Wade at Workfront, he takes his team and they go glass blowing, or they'll go. I've heard of UX teams go through a violin factory downtown, go do pottery, go outside of your normal creative world and kind of flex those creative muscles in a different way. Maybe you're not going to get inspired on what your next, interface is going to look like, but I think that's a really creative. It's a great team building, and it's a way to get out of the 4 walls and maybe break some of that rut you're in.
I think that's a great solution. And adding to that, limitations foster creativity. So put artificial limitations. Tell yourself, for this specific challenge, I'm not going to use my design system. I'm not allowed to use the colors that I usually use. I'm not allowed to use the tools that I usually use. And now you're forced to think outside of the box. That means you have to take that time, and you have to kind of have the culture again and the understanding of your leadership that they give you that time. But maybe make it a game, or, you know, sometimes it's okay to do it after work, you know, and because it will enrich your life and as a designer or as a product manager, and there's always something you can get out of it. And you're here right now, right? So this is amazing.
Yeah, I think there's lots of fun activities you can go do. Like you can go take down all the lost pet signs and redesign them so they look good, and then post them back up. I made my team hike Timpanogos one time. that was a good team building exercise. They had to do hard things, and so if you come back and do hard things in the office. I took a chocolate making class. There's like glass blowing. Sometimes we would take like one of our critiques, we would not critique, but we would design like a really random app, like a cattle rancher app. So, or some kind of weird challenge, like, or take our interview questions, we'd like have to do them ourselves.
Yeah, I think doing activities, hiking, Timpanogos, getting some fresh air. I think all those are great. You know, one of the activities that when I was at architectural firm, he would have us do was we'd have to go and take pictures, right, of shadows, of trees, of a leaf, of twigs, right? Because when we got into master planning a neighborhood, we kept looking at the same layout. You know, if I have an entrance here, I'm gonna have an exit here, I'm gonna have this here, right? And you get in a mode of like, okay, I'm just gonna put a sidewalk over here, maybe a park right here. And then to get out of that mindset, to kind of like reset, we had to go and explore things that were contrary to what we were trying to do, right? Looking at the abstract, so that when we came back, we had fresher eyes and like, oh my gosh, this thing that I saw over here, maybe it's even a color, right? It allowed us to get back into that product or to that neighborhood design or whatever we were doing, and look and say, man, I remember when I was looking at this light post, it cast this type of shadow. That would be really swell if we had an idea like that over here, right? And so taking what you're used to, but then doing something drastically of a negative of it, right, can really help you just rejar and bring that fresh new look back to your product.
Okay, we have time for one last question. No pressure. Come on, guys. Okay.
I keep thinking about Sears, you know, going out of business, and how they had the money for decades that they could have built something that could have competed online. But they didn't, or at least they didn't do it as well as the other clubs did. In healthcare, where I come from, the major electronic health record vendors are competing for many billions of dollars in that space. And I heard one of my co-students, one of my classmates once say that he believed that the one that will emerge as the best is going to have the best user experience, not necessarily the best certain widget or certain this or that. It'll be the overall flow, for the user. How do you get beyond? I'm imagining that it's more senior leadership that's saying this is the full experience for the customer versus this is what a page looks like. How do you begin to say more about the full experience for the customer, and not just what a certain page or product looks like?
So the question is, how do you get beyond just focusing on maybe one page of a product and look at the whole picture, the full customer experience?
I keep wanting to snag yours. This is a hard question and a very easy question, because why have you ever only looked at one page in the first place? Now, yes, it's easy for me to say, but really this is what happens at a lot of big companies, right? Everybody, like, we're so split up, and like the Tayloristic approach of like everybody has their own little thing that they're responsible for, and that's what they can influence. This is how they get measured, and because they're only getting measured at that very specific local point, nobody looks at the whole experience. Some companies, since we're talking about maturity right now, some companies are more mature and they have departments that are set up to be cross. Companies that are more mature usually have their goals, targets, KPIs linked to each other, so that when you miss the mark here, the influence over here is going to be shown. And it goes a little bit back to your question earlier with like, okay, we're celebrating the win of the one button, but we really have messed up the whole process. I mean, one thing you can do is like, how do you test your success? Do you look, is your test case the whole onboarding experience, including then buying the product, using it, and maybe even getting rid of it? Or is your test case, could they click the button, and was it fast enough, could they find it, right? And so I think, again, it goes back a little bit to the culture and the question of how do we look at our business? And sometimes this is hard and frustrating when you're the UX designer on product team Z and you don't have that influence. But maybe you can make that test, and maybe you can record this user test, and maybe you can share it with someone. Or you can make, like, we're talking about experience, and experience is how does somebody feel as they're doing this? So put them in the shoes of the customers. A lot of times what happens in companies is the senior management and even your product manager doesn't even have time to experience and be the customer. So make everybody be the customer. And then these things actually, sometimes they're so glaring, they will just like, they will hurt when you go through it. When I started working in product, I kept saying, and I was in email, which is like a commodity product, right? So I kept saying, if it doesn't hurt, it's a good experience. If you're not having a headache using it, it's a good experience. And I think this is still true in a sense. Like if you're trying to get healthcare and I'm from Germany, it was really hard and really nerve-wracking to understand the system here in the first place, mind you, using it online. And it's scary. There's a lot of risk involved. So can you de-risk this for your user? And I think it's really in like, how do you test for it? How do you ask the right questions? How do you hone in? And how do you bring that back into your company? Have lunch meetings, invite everybody to eat pizza, and let them watch those videos that we've taken with the users as they were struggling. It's nothing more powerful than observing a user struggling. When you have a discussion with an engineer and you're like, I don't want to code this is stupid. Like, well, you go and you watch the user struggle. Oh yeah, that makes total sense. Please let me do that. So I don't know, I hope this answers your question a little bit.
I've got 3 ways you could help innovation come into your product or your company. And they're different amounts of time commitment. So one is the journey map I talked about, where you're going through not your product, but the user's journey, and you might have multiple users. So any kind of touch point this person is having to get to the end product. And you want to take some time to go research your competitors, research the market, watch users actually go through this, so it's based on actual evidence, not on your perception on what's happening. And build it out, print it out. You can do this at FedEx or Alpha Graphics, and it's like 80 cents a foot. It's really cheap. Just print it out on like an architectural paper. And then have your company come up and just walk through this journey, and then add places where you've missed until you build out this complete map of your customer, how they're getting to your product, or not your product specifically, but a product, similar to your market. That one's time consuming. That's several weeks of time, but that gets a lot of consensus and a lot of visibility. The next step would be, you can do role playing. It's just a product walkthrough, your own product. You can use a little Lego people to represent the different users, but have them like actually walk through the product, like end to end. And that's really good when you've got people that are just very blind to how your product works together or the pain points. And the next one is, and this one's very quick, it can take just 2 or 3 hours, design the worst possible experience you could possibly design. And you'll look back and say, oh, that's what our product does already. But once you get everyone in the room or your team to like admit that you're doing some things that are very bad, like anti-user experience, then it becomes easier to decide on how to prioritize how to make it better.
I think this is great, and I actually love the way you structure your answers. I can learn so much from you. One thing for Sears, though, because I think Sears is an example of a whole different problem. It's the problem of I've seen success with one thing, and so I become blind to the change that I need to do and the growth. Because change, and that's kind of in a human psyche a little bit, it's hard to change if you don't have to. We're all staying in our comfort zone. It goes a little bit back to your question, how do I not get like so boxed in? It's a similar question. How do I don't fall into the Sears trap if I'm a company? It's really hard. It's by bringing in new people, by allowing new people to have different opinions and state them. And it goes back to even having interns. I think interns, you are the future leaders, and you'll be able to create internship programs. Bring interns into your company because they usually have a fresh perspective. They use tools that you don't use. They have success with things that you don't even know about, and they will give you that inspiration. And then it's, again, part of the culture to allow, to foster that. And sometimes it works from the ground up. Like there is a lot of times if you can show success, little successes, you can build trust, and that is what allows you to build relationships, and then all of a sudden you're showing up on the map, and then you can, not become Sears, but Amazon or whatever the next big thing is.
Awesome. Way to tie it all together. Well, thanks, everybody. I think we should give them a round of applause. And as Mike mentioned earlier, there's a question-answer Slack channel on Product Hive. So anything that maybe you thought of but didn't ask or comes up on your drive home, feel free to post it in there. And we can have some good discussions.
Okay, I'll just add one more thing. Can I just add one word? Wow. I mean, and thank you to our video team back there. So this will obviously be on the Product Hive YouTube channel, as well as the podcast. So if you were furiously trying to write down all of this stuff and you're like, oh, I missed that thing, this will be posted on the YouTube channel as well. So, and a lot of people, we try and keep these numbers to this group where we can have a chat like this. And so I appreciate you coming tonight. I appreciate you having these discussions with them. I've talked to them earlier, and I want you all to have that comfort level where you know you can reach out to them and continue these conversations. As Sun mentioned, this is the future of product, this community we're building where we're sitting down at lunch and bringing other teams in. This is the future. We are facilitators of diverse and creative thinking in our organizations, and so we have to do that as a community. So let's just give our video team a round of applause too for setting this all up. And we'll let you all go, and we'll see you all at the next Product Hive event. Thank you.